So, where do I begin? I guess I want to preface the review by saying that I'm going to be reviewing this game or assessing it from two different perspectives. I am going to review it based upon how fun the game is, how good the game is by 2019 standards, which is the time when I'm reviewing this. But I'm also going to temper it by understanding that this game came out in 2006 and it was a very different time back then, and the standards have since surpassed what this game established at the time. There's been so much development in the open world genre, uh, so I think it's important to take into account both perspectives. Okay. Um. So yeah. I consider Oblivion to be kind of like Morrowind 2.0. That's what it reminds me of the most, more than anything else. Like it feels very similar to Morrowind, except improved in every aspect. Every problem I had with Morrowind, this game improves upon it, and it strengthens the strengths of Morrowind even further. So the strengths of Morrowind, of course, were just the exploration, the open world. That was the biggest difference between Morrowind and Daggerfall. Daggerfall had an open world, but it was lifeless and there was nothing to do on it. Morrowind gave you an open world where there was actually like something to explore. And this game takes that and just makes it bigger and more detailed, makes the graphics nicer, a little bit, and also adds full voice acting. One of the biggest problems I had with Morrowind was the lack of voice acting and the fact that everything just kind of felt tacked on. Like the menus in that game. You look at the menus in this game, and I'm using a mod which improves them, but even the original menus looked all right. But the menus in Morrowind, it felt like Windows, the Windows in actual like Windows 95 and stuff like that. Like it looked that bad. So it just had this like veneer of cheapness that I really didn't like. And since there was no voice acting in the game, it it took away from the immersion of the world that you were in. Whereas Oblivion helps cement that immersion and makes you feel like you're playing a real game as opposed to just like a tech demo. Um, So, every character is voice acted. Now, in all fairness, like, they repeat the voice actors over and over again. Like, you're gonna hear the same voice actor voicing, um, so many different characters. Um, but that's to be expected when you have a game this big. So the real strength of the Elder Scrolls games is with the questing. The sheer amount of content that there is in the game. And that's definitely the best part of the game. The worst part of the game is actually the main quest itself. When you stick to the main quest and try to complete it, it's really boring. And that's a big problem. And I think it's tied to the poor story. I'm not like a real big fan of Elder Scrolls in general. I like the games, but I don't know much about the universe. And anyone who's playing these games for the first time, they're going to be lost when it comes to the lore and the universe. And that's okay, but the story is just bland. Like, there's nothing to the story in these games. Like, it's conveyed with like convoluted lore. There's some books you can read, and that's great. But the way it conveys the story to the player is very poor, especially when you compare it to other RPGs at the time, and came before it, like Knights of the Old Republic and Dragon Age. They are able to convey much, much better story than the Elder Scrolls games ever have. And so this is a complaint that applies, even back in 2006. And applies just as much now. With the main quest, you don't spend too much time on the open world doing stuff, which is where the fun is. You spend most of your time in dark, dank dungeons, which are visually boring. You know, dungeons are just, I mean, they're by design boring. And that's one thing I wish they kind of limited more. And in all fairness, the game tried to liven that up with the Oblivion Gate. So that's the big appeal to Oblivion. That's what it's actually named after, the Oblivion Gates. And the Oblivion Gates are basically dungeons that are red. And at first they look cool, but the sheer amount of them, there becomes a very sameness to them. They look very samey. They all kind of look the same. And when you're doing so many, especially back to back, and you're gonna need to do some for the main quest. Luckily, you don't need to do them all because there's so many. Um, it's gonna grate on you. In all fairness, though, I mean, they do look visually better than like just a dank dungeon that's dark and in a crypt or whatever. But anytime you're exposed to too much of the same thing over and over again, yeah, it's gonna grate on you. Luckily, for some of the optional Oblivion gates, um, you do get some pretty cool rewards. So that definitely helps out a lot when it incentivizes doing dungeons and stuff like that. I also like how you can do side quests that give you like really powerful relics and items that can help you out, like the lockpick. So that's a pretty cool way to incentivize doing side stuff, which is of course the main attraction to this game. The main attraction to this game is not the main quest, it's doing all the side stuff. But I wish that it did both. Um, so the combat compared to Morrowind, I was talking about Morrowind before. The combat in Morrowind was definitely the weakest part of that game. And Oblivion actually improves upon the combat a little bit, but not by much. For something, I mean, and the thing is, you're doing combat like 80% of the time in this game. It's a big part of the game. It is technically an action RPG. But the combat is just not very good. The biggest improvement it has over Morrowind is that every single one of your attacks, like if I equip my sword, every time I swing at the enemy, it's going to hit. But that's literally the only difference. Um, in Morrowind, when you would swing at the enemy, most of your attacks would actually miss and wouldn't do any damage, and that had a big psychological impact on the player. Because it felt like you were doing nothing. You were just hitting air all the time, even though you were right in front of the enemy. It still didn't do anything. So Oblivion fixed that, which is something they should have implemented in Morrowind right from the start. But other than that, it's still the same. You still fight enemies in the same way. You just keep on clicking until the enemy's dead, and that's basically it. You can like hold down the mouse button to do these like charged attacks. You can kind of strafe left and right and do some kind of disarm attack. But honestly, like it never worked for me. I tried doing it, it never worked. And I'm assuming that if you keep on leveling it up, you'll uh, get some more attacks or whatever. But none of them are really all that interesting. The magic, I don't know. I beat the game and I tried to do magic, but honestly, the magic it looks lame. Like this is one of the more powerful attacks in the game, I guess. And it visually looks lame. Even back in 2006, this just kind of is generic looking to me. I kind of expect more from my RPGs to have more visually impressive spells, but I never got one that looked decent. Maybe there are and I just didn't encounter it, but from I'm just talking about what I experienced, and I never saw a spell that looked very more visually impressive than this. So that's pretty disappointing. Um, yeah, I was a bow character mostly, had some spells. The bows, just it's about standard. You can move and shoot at the same time. You don't have to stand still, so that's nice. Um, but yeah, overall combat is pretty much garbage in this game. And it's something that they definitely need to improve upon. And from what I understand, they did improve upon it in Skyrim just a little bit, and they need to continue doing that because I just don't think it cuts it. Um, Now I mentioned a little bit about how it stacks up in 2019. You know, there's been so much development in the open world genre that a lot of the things that made this game special are no longer special, right? But at the time in 2006, this vast area, you had a huge map to explore. Um, but these days, yeah, we have a lot of open world games, but there's still some appeal, I think, to a game like this because even you have other open world games like Horizon Zero Dawn, Far Cry 3, and stuff like that. When you have an open world RPG like this, you just the, the appeal of an Elder Scrolls game over something like Witcher 3 is the sheer amount of quests. There's still more quests to do in this game. And while they may not be as detailed as some of the stuff you might find in other games, there's just so much to do, and some of it's pretty decent and has decent rewards. So I think that's the real appeal of this game that stands the test of time a little bit, even compared to the competition that have improved upon this. Um, so there were four major complaints I wanted to make about this game, and I'm going to delineate them right now. Um, the one major complaint that applies irrespective of time, whether it was 2006 or 2019 or whatever, are the glitches. This game crashed a total of 7 times on me, and that is so unacceptable. That is after all the patches, including a fan patch, and it still crashes. And what that does to you is it puts you in the habit of always saving. So like I'll always go into here, make a save, and then I have a whole bunch of saves just in case it crashes on me so I don't lose too much progress. And that gets annoying. The game does autosave, but it doesn't autosave enough to compensate for the crashes, and anything more than 0 is unacceptable. Some nice ragdolls there. I want to comment on some of the animations since I just saw that now. Okay, the game is gonna have like some kind of chunky graphics. The animations are gonna be really stiff and kind of weird. Um, I can mostly forgive that since it's 2006. It's a 2006 game. Um, but at the very least, like this bow I have right now, it has the ability to knock enemies down, and it just uses the same death animation as the knockdown animation. So when you knock enemies down, you can't tell that they've been knocked down or if they died. And it should have been different. So I can forgive the chunky graphics, the low poly models, and the stiff animations, but I can't forgive that. You might say that's a little thing, but I'm sure there's more issues related to animations taking you out of the game and also kind of interfering with the gameplay. Um, so the second big problem I have with this game is the fast travel system. So in Morrowind, I guess people complained that you couldn't fast travel easily enough. So instead they went in the complete opposite direction. So now you can fast travel anywhere you want, almost. Like any city, yeah, you can fast travel to it whether you've been there already or not. And this, in my opinion, breaks the game. It's like you've created such a vast open world. Why? Why do you ruin it with having such cheap and easy to use fast travel? Some other games implement some restrictions on it. The most logical one, of course, would be you have to go to the location first before you can fast travel to it. In this game, they don't do that. You can fast travel all you want, whether you've been there first or not, and that really takes away from the exploration. You don't spend a lot of time on the open world if you're just, you can. What's the point? You can always fast travel, so why bother? You know, and I had to like just I intentionally did not use the fast travel several times just because I wanted to appreciate the world because it's gorgeous. It looks great. Why would I want to ruin it by fast traveling everywhere, which you can do right from the start of the game? It makes the world feel less vast and open. All right. Um, so that's number two. Okay, number three big complaint that I have is it doesn't organize the quests properly. It just kind of jumbles them up for you. So here's like all the quests that we can do, but it doesn't organize them. It doesn't organize them into main quests and side quests, and that makes it disorganized. So I don't know what's actually a main quest because like it's throwing so much information at me. I don't know what's going on with the story. So it would have just been nice for them to organize between the two, which is like a standard feature. The other and the fourth major problem I had with the game was you can sell. There was one instance where you can sell a key item that's necessary for the main quest. It was not a key item. Now, this game does have quest items, but for some reason, there was a essential item that you couldn't easily acquire. It was like some book, um, and it allowed me to sell it, so I did. And when it turned out, oh, wait a minute, I actually need that book. I thought I was done with the book. Like, I'm not completely stupid. I thought I was done with the book. I didn't need it anymore. And I wanted to sell it because I needed the cash and also because it weighed a lot. And weight is a big issue in this game. You're always being encumbered, so weight management is important. You want to get rid of any useless crap as quickly as possible. So I sold it and then I basically ruined the game state. It was technically possible to recover it because I think you could acquire it uh, somewhere else, but it was not. It wouldn't. It's not easy to acquire it again. And I had to eventually just use a console command. I had to use a cheat in order to get the book back. And I hate doing that. I don't want to have to do that just to make up for an oversight on game design. And I'm amazed that that went through, like bug testing. That should have been a quest item. There's no reason why it shouldn't have been a quest item. And it's just such an obvious thing to have. So that's my fourth major complaint. Um, there's like some other little things like that detract away from like this being a true like cinematic experience because it really isn't. And it should be. Uh, it doesn't have cinematics. It has scripted scenes, and I would encounter some, and I wouldn't even know that they were scripted scenes. And I just feel like it doesn't have that. Elder Scrolls games don't have that extra layer of polish to make the game feel like a total experience. They always just keep you in the first person perspective, and I really disagree with that. I think that there is a place for having cutscenes and things, um, which just add that extra layer of polish and make it feel like this isn't just some guy's beta game sitting on his desktop and you're just kind of like beta testing it, you know? The Elder Scrolls games have a reputation of feeling rough and constantly in a state of feeling unfinished. Um, and yeah, that it's just one thing that I think that they should improve upon and finally add in Elder Scrolls games. Um, Now I actually played Fallout 3 after this. Excuse me, before this, a long time ago. And a lot of people said Fallout 3 was basically Elder Scrolls with guns. But since I played that game first, this game to me feels like Fallout 3 except with swords. And for me personally, I prefer Fallout 3 for a couple of reasons. I think the gameplay, I think they like kind of polished out, the quirks with this game engine. They managed to improve the graphics a little bit, um, and they helped polish it up a little bit more to make it feel more like a real game, like a real cinematic experience, a real experience. I like the world more. I'm more of a Fallout fan, so I just prefer the lore in that game and the story. Um, but I think, yeah, I mean, overall, I just prefer that game um, over Oblivion. Now, I've done a lot of criticizing of Oblivion, but I do like this game, you know. It's still a good game. I think it's best played if you're just kind of doing the side quests, exploring, and not really sticking to the main quest because the main quest is just terrible. But I enjoyed my time with it. Enemy design's pretty cool. I mean, you're seeing this guy right now. Even though they're low poly, they're low 2006 graphics. I like the aesthetic. It's pretty neat. I want to also emphasize that I am reviewing this game as if it wasn't modded. Now, you may have noticed I am using some mods, cleaned up the textures on some of the surfaces and in the menus, but I am reviewing this game as if it was completely untouched, as it was released back in 2006. So I am fully prepared to admit that the modern version of Oblivion is a completely different game. It could very well be a completely different game if you keep on adding like 1,000 mods, which improve the graphics dramatically and add a ton of content. It's kind of like Doom in that respect, in that it really isn't fair to consider it to be like the same kind of game. It really isn't. It's a different game, and that game could very well be much better, but that's not the game that I'm reviewing. Okay, so that's Oblivion. I think it's a pretty good game. It's not bad. But I think in 2019, there's better open world games out there, but that's to be expected. And that's all I gotta say.